It was a Tuesday, a meaningless, gray Tuesday in October, when my entire life got stripped down and rebuilt in the span of one dinner. I remember the weather because I remember thinking, as I stood in the parking lot of the restaurant, that I should have brought a heavier jacket. The wind was cold, biting, the kind that cut right through a thin blazer. It seemed like a small, irrelevant thing to focus on, but my mind was clinging to normalcy. It was trying to protect me from what I was about to walk into. The restaurant was called Le Jardin, one of those places where the menus don't have prices and the waiters speak in hushed, reverent tones. It was my fiancée Amelia's choice. Her father's choice, really. He was a man who equated the cost of a meal with the value of a person, and by that metric, he was the most valuable person in the room before he even walked in. I'd spent the last 4 years of my life orbiting around his world, trying to prove that I was worthy of his daughter. I'd done everything I could think of. I'd been the reliable boyfriend, the patient partner, the man who was always there to fix the leaky faucet in Amelia's apartment, the one who stayed quiet and nodded along when her father, Arthur, launched into one of his lectures about real success and generational wealth. I was a contractor. I owned a small, successful construction and property management company. It wasn't glamorous. It was hard, honest work, building things with my hands, managing properties with my brain. I'd built it from the ground up, starting as a laborer when I was 18, sweating on roofs and hauling lumber, until I'd saved enough to buy my first fixer-upper. My business was my pride, my tangible proof that a man could build something of value without a silver spoon or a trust fund. But to Arthur, I was a glorified handyman. A guy with dirt under his fingernails who just happened to be dating his daughter. I'd learned to live with it. You do, when you love someone. You learn to swallow the little comments, the dismissive glances, the way he'd talk about stock portfolios and golf club memberships while I stood there, feeling like a guest in my own life. I'd convinced myself that love was more important. That Amelia was worth it. That eventually, maybe after we were married, Arthur would see the man I was and not just the job title he'd assigned me. I was a fool. A complete, pathetic fool. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Our engagement. We'd been engaged for 4 months, and I'd finally saved enough for the down payment on a house, a real home for us. I was going to tell them that night. I'd found the perfect place, a beautiful old Victorian in a nice part of town. It needed some work, but for a man in my line of work, that wasn't a problem. It was going to be my surprise. My moment to show Amelia and her family that I could take care of her, that I was a provider, just like her father. When I walked into the private dining room, the scene was set. The table was huge, draped in white linen, surrounded by Arthur, his wife Margaret, Amelia's younger brother Bradley, and Amelia herself. I'd arrived a few minutes late because I'd been at a job site, overseeing a crew, and my phone was just for emergencies. I didn't see Amelia's text until I was already in the car. It was a simple message, "Please don't be late." You know how Dad gets. I took a deep breath, pasted a smile on my face, and walked in. I leaned down to kiss Amelia on the cheek, but she turned at the last second, offering only her cheek, a gesture that felt more like a performance than a greeting. Arthur was already talking, his voice a familiar baritone of authority. "Finally decided to join us, did you? I hope the traffic wasn't too stressful. Of course, you were probably on the highways, at this time of day. I remember when I was working for myself, I could never plan my time properly either. You're always at the mercy of other people, aren't you?" The comment was a needle, expertly inserted. I smiled and sat down. "Just a small issue with the delivery, Arthur. I'm glad I could make it." I looked at Amelia, hoping for a supportive glance, a smile, anything. She was looking at her menu, her perfectly manicured nails tracing the words. Margaret, his wife, chimed in with a high, tinkling laugh. Oh, yes, the working man's problems. Arthur always says, if you want something done right, you have to pay someone who's made it. Not a boy who's still trying to make it. She gave me a thin, predatory smile. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. But it was a sharp, cold beauty, the kind that could draw blood. I sat there, my appetizer growing cold, while Arthur held court. He talked about an investment property he'd just bought, another one, in some exclusive zip code that probably cost more than my entire business. He talked about his charity golf tournament, the one where he rubbed elbows with senators and celebrities. He didn't ask me a single question. Not about my business, not about my week, not about anything. I was a piece of furniture, a silent witness to his greatness. The main course came and went. I barely tasted the ridiculously expensive filet mignon. My mind was racing, a mix of anxiety and resentment. I was rehearsing my announcement. Amelia and I found a house, I'd say. I've been saving, and I've got the down payment ready. It's a beautiful home, and it's all ours. I'd practiced the line until it sounded natural, but as I sat there, the moment felt more and more impossible. Then, my moment arrived, and it was stolen by Bradley. Amelia's brother was a golden retriever of a person, all enthusiasm and little substance. He'd never held down a job for more than 6 months, but Arthur's money always cushioned his falls. So, big news, everyone, he announced, leaning forward. I got the apartment. The one on Maple and 8th. The penthouse. I'm moving in next month. Margaret clapped her hands. Oh, Bradley, that's wonderful. It's a beautiful building. Arthur, isn't that the one you were telling me about? Arthur nodded, looking at his son with a pride he'd never shown me. The one with the amenities. Very prestigious. Good for you, son. It's a place that shows you've got a certain station in life. The mention of the address made me freeze. Maple and 8th. I knew that building well. I'd renovated it 4 years ago. The owner, an older man named M.R. Harrison, had been one of my first major clients. We'd become friends, he and I. He had no children, and when his health began to fail, I'd been the one he called. I'd helped him manage it, organized the maintenance, and kept an eye on things. It was a beautiful Art Deco building, and I knew its value. I also knew its flaws, its old boiler system, its antiquated plumbing, the things that only someone who'd been inside the walls would know. But what Bradley said next sent a jolt through me. He was going to be renting one of the units there. Before I could process it, Amelia reached over and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was light, meant to be affectionate, but it felt like a cage. Now, Dad, before you get too excited about Bradley's new apartment, I have some news of my own. She paused, and her eyes met mine. She looked beautiful in the candlelight, her features soft and perfect. But her expression was one I'd never seen before. It was a mixture of pity and resolve. Derek and I have been thinking about our future. I nodded, a wave of relief washing over me. This was it. She was going to tell them about the house. This was the partnership I'd been waiting for. That's right, Arthur, I began, my voice a little shaky with excitement. I wanted to tell you tonight. And we've realized, Amelia said, cutting me off, her voice suddenly sharp and firm, that our priorities are just different. I've been talking to Dad, and he's going to help me. He's going to help me get my own place. A condo. Something in a good area. Something that's more fitting. The words hung in the air. I blinked, confused. My own place, she'd said. He's going to help me get my own place. I looked at her, my fiancée, the woman I'd given 4 years of my life to, and I couldn't understand what I was hearing. Amelia, what are you talking about? We were going to buy a house together. I've been saving. I have the down payment. It's ready. She let out a short, sharp sigh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated exasperation. The sound a parent makes when a child is being stubborn. Derek, come on. Be realistic. She said it slowly, as if explaining the concept to a dog. My father's world, it requires a certain lifestyle. I can't be living in some fixer-upper in the suburbs. I need a place that has a doorman, a gym, valet parking. Things that reflect the kind of life I was raised to have. Arthur leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. Look, Derek, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, my daughter has a position in society. She's done a very fine job trying to live in your world, but it's time for her to be realistic. You're a good, hard-working young man, I'm sure, but this is a matter of compatibility. My daughter needs a man who is already established. Not a man who is trying to become established. The word trying hit me harder than any slap could have. It was the second time they'd used it. Trying to make it. Trying to become established. As if my life was an unfinished project, a failed experiment. Margaret leaned in, her voice a sugary poison. Be honest with yourself, Derek. Look at what you're doing. Look at what you are. You're a builder, a laborer. It's quaint. You smell like sawdust sometimes, you know. That's fine for a girl in college, but for a woman of Amelia's standing? It's just not appropriate. You have to see that. You have to have the decency to see that. I felt a cold dread start to creep up my spine. My face was burning, but my hands were freezing. I was being publicly dissected, my life and my worth reduced to a line item on a financial statement. I looked at Amelia, my eyes pleading for her to stop it. Amelia? What are they saying? Is this what you think? Do you think I'm not good enough for you? She wouldn't meet my gaze. She just stared at her wine glass. Derek, it's not that you're not good enough, she said, her voice soft and infuriatingly patient. It's that our lives are just going in different directions. I'm not ashamed of you. I see a future for myself that you can't give me. Your career, for instance. You're almost 35, and you're still on job sites. How long can you do that for? What happens when you're 50? Where are your savings? Where's your retirement? Don't you see? You're a risk, Derek. And I can't take that risk. You told me you loved me, I whispered, my voice barely audible. You said yes. I said yes because I wanted to believe it was possible. I was wrong, Derek. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were cold, like a stranger's. I'm sorry. I sat there, completely and utterly stunned. The world had just tilted on its axis, and I was falling. 4 years. 4 years of my life, my love, my energy, my money. I'd paid for dinners, I'd fixed her car, I'd been the shoulder she cried on when her dog died. I had been her rock, and now, she was tossing me aside like a piece of gravel on the road because the pavement wasn't good enough for her. Arthur cleared his throat, laying a $100 bill on the table. I think we're done here. This has been clarifying. He stood up, buttoning his blazer. Amelia, you're coming with me. Your mother and I are going to meet with a realtor. We're taking you to see some places. Real places. For people with a future. I stood up as well, my chair scraping back against the floor. It was an aggressive sound in the quiet, refined restaurant. The whole room was watching us. I felt like I was in a play, a humiliating, one-act tragedy, with me as the fool. "Amelia," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not done. You're making a huge mistake. I have a plan. I have something I was going to show you. You don't understand what you're throwing away." She stood up, taking her purse, not looking at me. "Derek, please. Don't make a scene. You're being dramatic. Just, let go." Bradley snickered, walking past me. "Yeah, man. Let it go. You can't afford anything in this zip code anyway, let alone the lifestyle. I'm renting a place in a building that's probably worth more than your entire business." He laughed, a loud, empty sound. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a violent snap, not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, cold, tectonic shift. The last thread of my patience, my hope, my pathetic need for their approval, it severed. The calm I'd been clinging to evaporated, and in its place, a reservoir of anger and clarity rose up. I straightened my back, and my voice was no longer shaky. It was flat, level, and sharp as a blade. "You're right, Bradley," I said. "You are moving into a very expensive building. The penthouse. Very prestigious." I turned to Arthur, my gaze unwavering. "A building you're going to be paying a staggering amount of money for, I assume. A building you're so proud of." Arthur scoffed. "It's a beautiful building, one of the best in the city. It's a testament to real vision in real estate. It's an Art Deco gem, fully renovated and modernized." He was nearly preening. "It is," I agreed calmly. "And a lot of people don't know this. They see the beautiful exterior, the doorman. But the building has its secrets. The building has a history. It was in a state of near total disrepair when the current owner bought it. The owner bought it at a sheriff's sale for a pittance. The owner is a man who spends his days on job sites, who smells like sawdust. The owner is a man who was just told he wasn't good enough to rent a coat closet in the building he owns." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. Arthur's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the building at Maple and 8th, I said, my voice now a low, steady hum of controlled fury. "The building you so proudly announced your son is moving into. Mr. Harrison, the previous owner, he passed away 2 years ago. He left it to the man who renovated it, who maintained it, who treated it with more respect than his own family ever showed him. He left it to me." Amelia's mouth was open, a perfect O of shock. The condescension was gone from Margaret's face. It was replaced by a horrified, slack-jawed expression. Bradley was just staring, looking like he'd been slapped. "That building," I continued, my eyes locked on Arthur's, "has been owned by me for the last 18 months. The owner who you just accused of not being established enough is the man who holds the lease on your son's prestigious new apartment. The man who you have been humiliating at this table for the last 2 hours is your son's landlord." Arthur took a step back, his hand hitting the table. He looked like he was going to be sick. "No. That's not possible. Harrison died without any heirs. I checked into it. I looked into the building." "You didn't look hard enough," I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. "The paperwork is all in order. His will is on file with the county. You see, Arthur, when a man has no children, he tends to leave his legacy to the person who acted like a son to him. Who showed up for him. Who didn't just see him as a business opportunity. You see, that's the difference between us. You see people as assets. I see them as people." I reached into my jacket pocket. I always carried a copy of the deed, an old habit from my days of owning rentals. I needed to prove it to myself sometimes, that I was a property owner. I pulled out the folded piece of paper and held it up for them to see. This is the deed. My name is on it. All of it. The entire building. Including the penthouse your son is about to sign a lease for. A lease I'm going to have a very hard time approving when I see the background check. Bradley's face went white. You can't do that. I've already paid the deposit. I turned to look at him. For the first time, I felt a surge of absolute control. And you can get it back. I'm sure there's a waiting list for a landlord who will be happy to take your money. It just won't be me. I looked back at Amelia, who was now staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. She was a stranger. A stranger I'd been in love with. Derek, I didn't know, she stammered. You never told me. How was I supposed to know? You weren't, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, filled with sorrow for the man I used to be. You were supposed to love me, regardless. You were supposed to believe in me. But you didn't. You saw what you wanted to see. A project. A stepping stone. A man who was beneath you. I looked at Arthur. You wanted a man for your daughter who was already established. Well, you got your wish. I am established. But I won't be establishing a life with her. I turned back to Amelia. The engagement is off. We're done. I won't be paying for a wedding. I won't be sharing my life with a woman who sees me as a liability. You can have your father's condo. I hope you and your doorman and your valet parking are very happy together. I slowly, deliberately, folded the deed and tucked it back into my jacket pocket. The small piece of paper felt heavier than the entire building it represented. I looked at the four of them, frozen in their seats, their power, their carefully constructed world of status and money, completely dismantled in a single moment. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said, my voice calm and polite, as if we were discussing the weather. And Arthur, if you'd like to discuss buying the building from me, my office is downtown. I'm usually there by 6 in the morning, working. I'm sure your schedule is more flexible. After all, you're already established. Goodbye. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I didn't see Amelia's face, or Arthur's anger, or Bradley's panic. I just walked. I walked through the gilded lobby, past the patrons who had watched the whole scene unfold, and out into the cold October air. The wind was still bitter, but I didn't feel it anymore. I felt light. I felt free. I sat in my truck for a long time. I didn't drive away. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger was still there, a cold, hard core in my gut. But it was tempered by something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was pride. It was a deep, resonant sense of self-worth that I'd let them strip away from me. I had been so desperate for their approval, for Amelia's love, that I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten my own value. I had been a fool. I'd let them treat me like I was less than, like I was just a handyman who lucked into dating their princess. But I wasn't just a handyman. I was a builder. I was an owner. I was the one who had built something with my own hands, my own mind, my own sweat and tears. I started the engine and drove home, to my own modest apartment. It wasn't a penthouse, but it was mine. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a cyclone of memories. I thought about the first time I saw Amelia, at a friend's party. She was so bright, so full of life. I'd been drawn to her like a moth to a flame. I thought about the day I got the news from Mr. Harrison's lawyer. I'd been shocked, overwhelmed. I'd tried to tell Amelia about it, but she'd been busy with her father, and I'd let the moment slip. I'd wanted to wait for the perfect time to tell her, to show her that I could be the man she needed. I'd wanted it to be a surprise. I'd been so careful, so patient, so thoughtful. And she had repaid me with a dagger to the back. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to retreat into a shell. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. This was a new beginning, not an ending. I was going to walk back into my life, but I was going to do it on my own terms. I was going to rebuild myself, not for anyone else, but for me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. There were calls from Amelia, of course. First, the tearful apologies. Then the anger. Then the threats. She claimed I'd entrapped her, tricked her. That I'd been hiding my wealth from her. She accused me of being a liar. It was a masterclass in projection. She projected all her own sins onto me, accusing me of the deceptions and manipulations she and her family had engaged in for years. I simply told her, in a calm, level voice, that the conversation was over, and I would communicate only through my lawyer. It wasn't the reaction she wanted. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to grovel. She didn't get it. She got silence. The threats from Arthur were even more interesting. At first, he tried legal intimidation. He sent a letter from his corporate lawyer, a vaguely worded threat about fraudulent disclosure. My lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Mark, laughed when he read it. He replied with a copy of the deed, the recording with the county, and a very polite note inviting Arthur's lawyer to check his facts. He also attached a draft for a proposed partnership that involved a significant business opportunity. It was a serious partnership. I was going to need a partner to help me develop the underutilized air rights over the building. It was a multi-million-dollar deal that could be extremely profitable. Arthur would be a good partner for the project. He had the capital and the connections, and I had the land. It was a perfect match. The attack from him died a quiet death. He realized he had no legal recourse, and that he had just torpedoed what could have been the best business deal of his life. I stayed in my apartment for a few days, just processing. I refused to see anyone. I needed time. One evening, my mother came over. She had heard about the dinner through the family grapevine, and she was visibly upset. She'd always liked Amelia, found her refined. She didn't understand why I'd broken it off. "You could have worked it out, Derek," she said, sitting on my worn-out couch. "You could have talked to her. You shouldn't have been so proud." "Proud?" I asked, incredulous. "Mom, I wasn't proud. I was humiliated. Publicly. In front of her entire family. And when I finally stood up for myself, they told me I wasn't good enough." "But you own that building now," she said, her voice tinged with a strange mix of pride and reproach. "You have money. You can give her the life she wants. You just had to share that with her. You had to tell her what you're worth." "Mom," I said, setting my coffee cup down with a sharp clink. "I should have been worth her love even when I was just a guy in a truck who fixed her sink. The moment I told her I had money was the moment her opinion of me changed. That's not love. That's an investment." I shook my head. She didn't want me. She wanted the building. My mother left shortly after, her own biases clouding her judgment. I loved her, but she was a product of a different generation. She believed a man's value was tied to what he could provide, and she couldn't understand my decision to walk away from a woman who was finally ready to appreciate that value. But I understood it perfectly. I knew that if I'd gone back to Amelia, groveling, forgiving, offering her the security of the building, she would have taken it. She would have married me for the assets, and I would have spent the rest of my life in a gilded cage, married to a woman who saw me as a wallet. I had escaped a trap. The final confrontation came a month later, at my office. Amelia showed up unannounced. The receptionist, a sweet girl, let her in because she looked so distressed. I heard the commotion outside my office door before I saw her. She burst in, her eyes red-rimmed, makeup smudged. The perfect facade had crumbled. She was a wreck. "Derek, please," she begged, dropping her purse on my desk. "Please, just listen to me. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I was wrong. I was a coward." I didn't get up from my chair. I just looked at her, my hands folded on the desk. "Amelia, you made your position very clear. There is nothing to talk about." I didn't understand what I was throwing away, she said, her voice wavering. "I was just so used to my father, he has such a strong influence. And I was scared. Scared of not having his support. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. You love what I represent now," I said calmly. "A month ago, I was a risk. Now, I'm a man with a prime piece of real estate." "Which is it?" "Because they are very different things." "It's not about the building," she insisted, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's about us. Our future." "No, Amelia," I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. "Our future ended the moment you called me a liability. Our future ended when you sat there and let your father treat me like I was nothing. You said you didn't want a scene? Well, you're making a scene now. And I'm not interested." She was trying to reach for my hand. She was going to use tears and physical touch to manipulate me. But I wasn't the same man. I pulled my hand away. "The engagement is over. There will be no wedding. You and your father can have whatever fancy condo you want. I'm going to be here, in my office, running my business." "What about me?" she asked, her voice so small it was almost pathetic. "What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know, Amelia," I said, my voice flat. "That's not my problem anymore." "You made sure of that." I stood up. The conversation was over. I walked around the desk and opened the door. "Please leave," I said, not unkindly, but firmly. "You're not welcome here." She stood there for a moment longer, staring at me like she didn't recognize me. And she didn't. The man who would have folded for her was gone. In his place was a man who knew his own worth. A man who didn't need validation. She finally walked out, her heels clicking on the hard floor, a sound that was no longer music to my ears, but simply the sound of her leaving my life for good. After she left, I sat back down at my desk. The sun was shining through the window, warming the room. I felt a profound sense of peace. I'd been released from a prison I hadn't even known I was in. I'd been a man who needed the love of a woman who was incapable of giving it. But I didn't need that anymore. I had myself. I had my business. I had my pride. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Arthur's business had been hit with a massive federal investigation for fraud. It had been in the works for a while, and the dinner had been the final nail in the coffin. His reputation was destroyed. Bradley's penthouse apartment was up for rent again. I leased it to a young couple from out of state, a tech entrepreneur and his wife. I gave them a great deal, just because I could. I moved forward with my life. I sold the building a few years later for a massive profit. I used the money to expand my construction company, to invest in my employees, to build more homes. I was building a legacy, not just on paper, but in the lives of the people I worked with. I learned that the greatest revenge is not humiliating your enemies, but simply forgetting they exist and building a life you're proud of. I stopped looking for a woman who would validate me, and I started looking for one who was my partner. I met a woman named Sarah, a high school math teacher who cared more about the kind of man I was than the size of my bank account. She didn't give a damn about buildings or investments. She loved me for the man I was, the one who fixed the broken things. Years later, I ran into Amelia at a charity event. She was still beautiful, but her beauty seemed hollow, like a shell. She was alone, clinging to her wine glass. She smiled at me, a sad, desperate smile. "Derek," she said, her voice husky with regret. "You look happy." "I am, Amelia," I said. "I found what I was looking for. I found someone who saw me, not my assets." She looked away, her face a mask of pain. She didn't offer me a congratulations. She didn't ask about my wife. She just walked away. I watched her go, and I felt nothing but a calm, distant pity. She was a product of a system she didn't create, a prisoner of a world she was raised in. She had been raised to look at a man and see a transaction. I had been raised to look at a man and see a person. I'd almost let her world destroy me. But I fought my way out. I built a life based on truth, and that life has given me everything I could ever need. Looking back, the dinner was the worst night of my life, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to see the truth. It broke my heart, but it also broke the chains. I finally realized that I'd been a fool to ever apologize for my ambition, to ever shrink myself down to fit into someone else's world. I'd been a fool to think I could buy love with silence. You can't buy something that was never for sale in the first place. I'm not a vengeful man. I'm not interested in destroying anyone. I'm interested in building. I'm interested in creating a life that has meaning. A life where the people I love know they are loved for who they are, not for what they can provide. And that, I believe, is the only revenge that truly matters. It's the quiet, steady victory of a man who finally, after years of being a footnote in someone else's story, looked at the blank page in front of him and started writing his own.